In this moving video from the Celebrities in Focus channel, we tell the story of the tragedy that shook the world, the death of Princess Diana. Discover the details of the fateful night of August 31, 1997 in Paris, when Diana and Dodi Al-Fayed were involved in a tragic car accident while fleeing paparazzi. We explore the events that led to the tragedy, the global outcry that followed, and the lasting legacy of the people's princess. Diana was much more than a princess. She was a figure of love, compassion, and humanity. Watch until the end to understand why her story continues to inspire millions around the world. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories about the greatest celebrities in history. Have you ever imagined what it was like to grow up in a place full of castles, enchanted gardens, and ballrooms? Sounds magical, doesn't it? That's how the life of Diana Frances Spencer began, born on July 1, 1961 in Sandringham, England. But not every fairy tale starts out perfectly, and that's the first detail that makes her story so fascinating. Diana was born into an aristocratic family, with titles and traditions that went back centuries. Her father, John Spencer, was the 8th Earl Spencer, and her mother, Frances Roche, also came from a noble lineage. They lived in a house called Park House, which was on Queen Elizabeth II's Sandringham estate. Yes, Diana literally grew up alongside royalty. From a young age, she played in the royal gardens, rode horses, and was surrounded by stories about the monarchy. But despite all this glamorous scenery, not everything was so happy. Diana was the Spencer couple's third daughter, and her arrival brought a lot of expectation. At the time, the family really wanted a boy, an heir to continue the noble title. So when Diana was born, although she was adored, there was a certain disappointment. Can you imagine how this could have affected the feelings of such a young child? Things got even more difficult when Diana was only 6 years old. Her parents divorced, something very unusual for noble families at the time. The separation was turbulent, marked by custody battles and a lot of emotional pain. Diana and her siblings, Sarah, Jane, and Charles, were divided between their mother and father. In the end, John Spencer won custody and Frances left, something that broke Diana's heart. She felt deep sadness and sometimes cried in her room. But even with this suffering, Diana had a cheerful and generous spirit. She was a lovely child with a smile that lit up any room. She loved taking care of animals, dancing to classical music, and playing outdoors. Her friends described her as sweet and shy, but also very strong inside. Little Diana already showed signs of her big heart. Whenever she saw someone sad, she made a point of helping. She was the kind of girl who would offer a hug or give a toy to brighten another child's day. It seems that, even without knowing it, she was already preparing to be the people's princess. What about you? Did you already know this part of Diana's story? This childhood full of ups and downs was what shaped the incredible woman that the world would learn to love later. Keep reading because this story only gets more exciting from here on out. Have you ever felt like you weren't the best at something but still knew you had something special to offer? Well, that's what Diana's life was like when she was a student. Although her life seemed like a fairy tale, her school journey was full of challenges and lessons that helped shape who she would become. Diana was educated at some of the most prestigious schools in England. One of the most memorable places was West Heath Girls' School. Imagine a large school with well-kept gardens, huge classrooms, and lots of discipline. This was where Diana spent most of her days. But you know what? Diana wasn't exactly a brilliant student. Her grades were average and she didn't excel in traditional subjects like math or science. But Diana had a special spark that went beyond her report cards. She was admired for her kindness and her unique way of treating people. Always helpful, she would help classmates who felt lonely or who had trouble keeping up with their classes. Often, her smile was enough to brighten someone's day. And do you know where she really stood out? In sports. Diana was very good at physical activities such as swimming, tennis, and ballet. She had a graceful way of moving, almost as if she were dancing all the time. Ballet in particular had a special place in her heart. She dreamed of being a professional ballerina, but unfortunately her height ended up making this dream more difficult to achieve. But Diana didn't let that discourage her. Ever since she was little, she had a deep desire to do something big, help people. And it wasn't just a distant dream. Even at a young age, she already demonstrated this love for others. Whenever she saw someone in need, Diana made sure to help, whether with kind words, a loving gesture, or even a practical action. When Diana finished school, she decided that she wanted to work with children. To do so, she went to study at a finishing school in Switzerland, the Institut Alpen Weidmanet. Although her stay there was short, the experience broadened her horizons. Back in London, she began working as a nanny and assistant teacher at a nursery school. Can you imagine the future Princess of Wales playing with children, teaching them simple lessons and making them laugh? Well, that was exactly how Diana began her professional life. With simplicity and dedication. She may not have known it yet, but this phase was the beginning of something much bigger. Her desire to help people would continue to grow until it transformed her life and the lives of millions of people around the world. What about you? Have you ever imagined that something as simple as a desire to help could change the world? Stay tuned, because Diana's story is just beginning, and the most exciting parts are yet to come. Have you ever imagined what it would be like to meet someone who, even without knowing it, already carried the shine of a star? That's exactly what happened to Diana before she became the most famous princess in the world. At that time, she was just a shy young woman, but with a natural charm that made everyone around her feel special. Diana moved to London. She was only 18 years old and wanted to lead an independent life, something that was unusual for young women of her status at the time. Even though she came from a noble family, Diana didn't hesitate to look for simple jobs that brought her personal fulfillment. One of her first jobs was as a nanny for children. Can you imagine Diana, the future Princess of Wales, helping children get dressed, playing in the park or reading bedtime stories? In addition to being a nanny, Diana also worked as an assistant teacher at a nursery school called Young England Kindergarten. There she looked after young children and helped them learn their first words, numbers and letters. Diana was the kind of person who always had a smile on her face and a look of understanding. Children adored her and parents were impressed by her patience and kindness. And there was something about Diana that was hard to ignore. Her simplicity. Even though she came from a wealthy family, she never liked to show off. Her style was effortless, with understated yet elegant clothing. She was the definition of effortless grace. In a world full of luxury and appearances, Diana stood out for her authenticity. She didn't need expensive jewelry or extravagant dresses to shine. Her sweetness and personality did all the work. But Diana was also shy. In social situations, she often remained quiet, observing more than speaking. She was someone who preferred to listen to stories rather than tell them. This shyness, however, was not a weakness. It was part of her charm. People around her felt that Diana was genuine and approachable, as if they could trust her immediately. Diana already showed a special care for others, something that would make her a figure of admiration in the future. Her colleagues and friends always said that she had a heart of gold. She was the kind of person who always noticed when someone was sad or in need of help and made sure to reach out to offer support, even if it was just with kind words. Can you imagine how someone with such a seemingly ordinary life could become one of the most beloved figures in the world? Well, Diana was about to embark on a path that no one could have predicted. And that sparkle that everyone saw in her? It was just the beginning. So, are you curious to know how this shy and elegant young woman became the people's princess? Stick around because the story is just beginning. Do you believe in destiny? Sometimes, it seems that certain encounters are written in the stars. That's how the story between Diana and Prince Charles began, a moment that would change her life forever. And also the history of the British royal family. Diana was just 16 when she first saw Charles. It was the summer of 1977, and she was still a shy teenager, living in a world where royalty seemed distant. At the time, Charles, aged 28, was the most eligible bachelor in England. He was the heir to the throne, charming and constantly surrounded by media and public attention. The meeting took place at the Spencer family country house in Althorpe. Charles was not there to meet Diana. In fact, he was a family friend and at the time interested in Diana's older sister, Sarah Spencer. Imagine that. Diana was the quiet young woman just watching from a distance, while Charles chatted animatedly with her sister. But something special happened that day. As Charles strolled through the beautiful gardens of Althorpe, Diana started talking to him. With her simplicity and natural charm, she managed to capture the prince's attention. She didn't try to impress or act overly fancy. She was just herself. Diana talked about her passions, laughed at Charles's stories, and showed a light-hearted and fun side that he hadn't expected to find. Charles was charmed by Diana's spontaneous manner. Maybe it was her smile or the sparkle in her eyes, but he realized that there was something unique about this young woman. Diana, on the other hand, was impressed to be talking to the prince that everyone knew, but who to her seemed just a kind and polite man. The two went their separate ways after this meeting. Charles continued his relationship with Sarah for some time, but it didn't last. Years later, it was Diana who occupied the space in his mind and in his heart. The prince began to see something in Diana that went beyond her beauty, a purity and authenticity that attracted him in a special way. But here's a fun fact. Diana, despite having liked Charles, never dreamed of marrying him at that time. She was young, full of dreams, and thought that the world of royalty was too far away for her. Little did she know that her destiny was already being mapped out. And so began the first chapter of one of the most talked about romances of the century. Can you imagine what it must have been like for Diana, a shy teenager, to catch the eye of the future King of England? It was as if her life was about to become a true fairy tale, but with many surprises along the way. Want to know how this romance evolved and changed Diana's life forever? Stay with me because the next part of this story is even more fascinating. Have you ever heard of a moment that seems magical, as if it were taken straight from a fairy tale? Well, that's exactly how the whole world saw the engagement of Diana and Charles, announced in 1981. But like every good story, this chapter had details that only made it even more fascinating. Imagine Diana, a shy 19-year-old girl living her quiet days, when suddenly the Prince of Wales, the man who would one day be king, proposed to her. It was something that took the world by surprise, and Diana herself too. When Charles proposed in February 1981, it was during a simple, private moment at Buckingham Palace. He looked at her and popped the big question. And do you know what Diana did? She laughed. Yes, she laughed nervously and in surprise. Sure, she said yes right after, but that moment showed how authentic and full of emotion Diana was. A few days later, the engagement was officially announced to the world, and that's when the magic began. People were completely fascinated by her. Diana was young, graceful, and had an air of sweetness that captivated. Next to Charles, she looked like the perfect piece of a modern fairy tale. But do you know what really stole the show? The engagement ring. It wasn't just any ring. It was a stunning blue sapphire ring surrounded by 14 diamonds, designed by Garrard Jewelers. Diana chose it herself, something that was unusual for royals at the time. Jewelry was usually custom-made, but Diana chose the ring straight from a catalog. It showed a bit of her independence and her own style. The ring wasn't just beautiful, it was a symbol of something bigger. To the public, it represented the beginning of a fairy tale. After the announcement, Diana began to live in the spotlight. The media followed her everywhere and the world wanted to know everything about her. What she wore, how she spoke, even how she walked. It was a kind of attention Diana had never experienced before. Imagine from one day to the next having cameras pointed at you wherever you went. Scary? Maybe. But Diana handled it all with a shy and graceful smile, winning over even more admirers. Meanwhile, preparations for the royal wedding were in full swing. It was as if all of England was getting ready to celebrate. Flags, music, flowers. Everything was already being planned for what would be the wedding of the century. And so, Charles and Diana's engagement became more than just a love story. It represented the hope of a real fairy tale in a world that yearned for moments of magic. But are all fairy tales really perfect? Stick around because the next parts of this story show that royal love can be as complicated as it is fascinating. You won't want to miss it. Can you imagine a day so grand that it seems straight out of a fairy tale? That's exactly what happened on July 29, 1981. On that day, the entire world stopped to watch the wedding of Lady Diana Spencer and Prince Charles. And when I say the entire world, I'm not exaggerating, more than 750 million people watched the event on television. It was the wedding of the century, and everything about it seemed magical. The ceremony took place at the majestic St. Paul's Cathedral in London, a place as grand as the occasion demanded. Early in the morning, the streets were packed with people holding flags, smiling and cheering to see Diana pass by. Many camped out all night just to secure a good spot. The atmosphere was pure celebration and London felt like the center of the world. Now let's talk about one of the most memorable moments: Diana's entrance into the cathedral. When the gigantic doors opened, everyone held their breath. There she was, in a dress that looked like something out of a dream. created by designers David and Elizabeth Emanuel. The dress was made of silk taffeta and antique lace, with hand-embroidered details, 10,000 pearls and an impressive 25-foot-long train. Yes, you heard right, 25 feet. It was the longest train ever worn at a royal wedding, and that alone made the crowd burst into applause. Diana entered the cathedral accompanied by her father, John Spencer. Her expression was a mix of nervousness and happiness, something that only made her even more adorable. As she walked down the aisle, it seemed as if time had stopped. Each step was accompanied by admiring glances, camera flashes and sighs. It was impossible not to be moved. Charles, meanwhile, was waiting at the altar. He wore an impeccable military uniform like the Prince of Wales. When Diana finally arrived at his side, he gave her a shy smile. It was a moment that seemed perfect, as if they were the protagonists of a story written to last forever. The ceremony itself was grand and full of traditions. There were moving readings, hymns played by angelic choirs and, of course, the long-awaited moment of the vows. And although everything seemed perfect, there was one small detail that showed that Diana was still human. She accidentally mixed up the order of Charles's names during the vows. But do you know what happened? This made her seem even closer to the public. It was a reminder that beneath all the royalty, Diana was still an ordinary young woman living an extraordinary moment. After the ceremony, the couple emerged from the cathedral to a wildly joyful crowd. Charles and Diana waved from their golden carriage as people cheered, threw flower petals and cheered for this unforgettable moment. It was as if all of England was celebrating with them. And who can forget the kiss on the balcony of Buckingham Palace? It was the first public kiss by a royal couple and has become one of the most iconic moments in modern history. Cameras captured the smiling couple, surrounded by the royal family as the public applauded endlessly. But what seemed like a happily ever after had many more layers than the public could have imagined. This marriage, which began as a fairy tale, was about to face unexpected challenges. And have you ever imagined that not every happy ending is as simple as it seems? Stay with me because Diana's story is just beginning. Did you know that even though she lived in a palace, Princess Diana insisted on being a mother like any other? Well, that's right. And that's one of the reasons why she is remembered as one of the most beloved figures in history. The arrival of Princes William and Harry brought even more brightness to Diana's life, and also the chance to show the world a maternal side that enchanted everyone. The first magical moment happened on June 21, 1982, when Diana gave birth to her firstborn, Prince William Arthur Philip Louis. The birth took place at St. Mary's Hospital in London. And that, in itself, was a huge break with tradition. Until then, it was common for royal heirs to be born inside palaces. But Diana wanted to do things her way. She chose the hospital so that everything would be more human and less distant. Diana held William in her arms, and from that moment on, her life changed forever. She dedicated herself body and soul to motherhood. Although she was surrounded by nannies and aides, Diana made sure to be present for all the important moments in her son's life. She rocked him to sleep, gave him baths and even took care of his diapers, something many would not expect from a princess. 2 years later, on September 15, 1984, Diana brought another joy to the world: the birth of Henry Charles Albert David, or as we all know him, Prince Harry. With the arrival of Harry, the family seemed even more complete. Diana always said that she wanted to raise her sons as two happy, well-balanced children. And for her, that meant doing something that was not common for royalty: giving the boys a normal childhood. She took them for walks in the park, let them play with other children, and even went to places that were surprisingly common for members of the royal family. Did you know that Diana took William and Harry out for burgers at fast food chains? That's right. She wanted them to see the world beyond the palace walls. Another remarkable gesture was the choice of schools. Diana chose to enroll William and Harry in regular schools rather than educate them exclusively within the palace. She wanted her sons to have normal friends and to learn to live in contact with other children. Diana often took them to school herself, holding their little hands and giving them that warm smile we all know. But it wasn't all fun. Diana also wanted William and Harry to grow up with a deep sense of empathy and responsibility. She took them on visits to hospitals, shelters, and orphanages, showing them how important it was to help those in need. These moments shaped the boys' characters and showed the world what kind of mother Diana was: loving, practical, and extremely dedicated. Despite the pressure and difficulties in her marriage to Charles, Diana found in motherhood a purpose that made her shine even brighter. The boys were her refuge and her greatest joy, and they knew it. Even at such young ages, William and Harry were deeply attached to their mother and returned her love with laughter, hugs, and moments that Diana would forever cherish in her heart. And you? Can you imagine what it must have been like for Diana to balance the role of mother and princess? Comment at the end of the video. I would love to hear your opinion. Have you ever met someone who, with a simple gesture, could make the world seem like a better place? That's exactly what Diana did. More than a princess, she was an inspiration. Someone who showed that love and empathy can change lives. And that's how she earned the title that would follow her forever, the People's Princess. Diana was not just a public figure surrounded by glamour. She used her position to connect with ordinary people, especially those who needed it most. One of her most memorable moments was when she visited HIV/AIDS patients in the 1980s, a time when prejudice and fear regarding the disease were rampant. During one of her visits, Diana did something that shocked the world. She shook hands with a patient without wearing gloves. In that moment, she broke taboos and showed that love and compassion speak louder than fear. And it didn't stop there. Diana became a powerful voice for many humanitarian causes. She visited hospitals, orphanages, and shelters, always bringing smiles and words of comfort. No matter who it was, a sick child, a lonely elderly person, or a struggling mother, Diana made a point of listening, hugging, and being there. It was as if she were saying to each person, "I see you. You matter." But perhaps one of her most iconic works was her campaign against landmines. In 1997, Diana traveled to Angola, where she walked through a deactivated minefield, wearing a helmet and protective vest. The image of her walking through such a dangerous place went around the world and brought attention to a problem that many people didn't even know existed. She wasn't just a figurehead. She was an activist determined to make a difference. Diana was also dedicated to helping children around the world. She supported institutions that cared for children with disabilities, the homeless, and those in vulnerable situations. On one of her trips, she was photographed holding a seriously ill child in her arms. That image showed the world that Diana was much more than a princess. She was a symbol of humanity. And do you know what made it all the more special? Diana did all of this from the heart. It wasn't for show or to win praise. It was because she genuinely cared. She said she wanted to be the queen of people's hearts, and she succeeded. Diana had the unique ability to make every person she met feel important and valued. But at the same time, this dedication made her vulnerable. The pressure of the media, the personal challenges, and the intensity of her humanitarian activities took a heavy toll. Yet Diana never gave up. She kept traveling, hugging, caring, and showing the world what it means to be truly selfless. Have you ever stopped to think about the power that a simple gesture can have? Diana taught us that a hug can break barriers, a smile can change a day, and a heart full of love can transform the world. Want to know what happened next? Stick around because Diana's story only gets more exciting. Have you ever heard the phrase, "Not everything is what it seems"? Diana and Charles's marriage was exactly like that. On the outside, it seemed like the perfect fairy tale. A graceful princess, a crown prince, and a grand wedding. But on the inside, the reality was very different, and full of challenges that Diana never imagined she would face. Soon after the wedding, Diana began to realize that life as a princess would not be easy. The relationship with Charles, which seemed promising at first, began to show signs of fragility. They were very different from each other. Diana was emotional, warm, and full of energy, while Charles was more reserved and introspective. These differences, which at first seemed complementary, began to create a distance between the two. And there was something even more painful for Diana: the presence of another woman. Camilla Parker Bowles, a longtime friend and lover of Charles, remained a part of his life even after the marriage. Diana discovered this little by little, and each discovery was like a new wound. In interviews years later, Diana described the marriage as crowded, referring to the fact that there worked 3 people in it. Imagine what it must have been like for Diana, young and full of expectations, to realize that her fairy tale had cracks. She tried in every way to save the marriage. She made affectionate gestures, tried to understand Charles, and even sought advice on how to deal with the pressures of royal life. But the feeling of loneliness was constant. In addition, the pressure from the media was relentless. Diana and Charles were the most photographed couple in the world, and their every move was scrutinized. The cameras captured everything: their smiles in public, but also their distant glances and moments of tension. The press asked invasive questions, created rumors, and sometimes magnified the problems. Diana felt as if she were living under a magnifying glass, with her every move being criticized or praised. As time went on, the difficulties in the marriage became unbearable. There were moments of intense disagreements, and both began to seek solace outside the relationship. Infidelities on both sides came to light, making the atmosphere even more tense. Diana, despite everything, tried to stay strong, especially for her sons William and Harry. They were her greatest joy and her source of support amidst the chaos. But the emotional pain began to affect Diana's health. She suffered from episodes of bulimia, which she described as a way of coping with stress and insecurity. It was difficult for her to balance the role of loving mother, admired public figure, and wife in a marriage that was falling apart. Despite everything, Diana never lost her shine. She found strength in her humanitarian work, in the connections she made with people around the world, and most importantly, in the love she had for her children. Her determination to move forward, even in the midst of difficulties, made her even more admired by the public. What about you? Have you ever thought about how even lives that seem perfect can be full of challenges? Keep following, because Diana's story still has exciting twists and turns. Have you ever felt that a difficult chapter in your life was coming to an end, but that it could be the beginning of something new? That's what happened to Diana when her marriage to Prince Charles reached its breaking point. In 1992, after years of tension, difficulties, and much pain, Diana and Charles decided to officially separate. The world watched, divided between sadness and hope that Diana would find her happiness again. The separation was announced in an official statement. Despite being separated, Diana and Charles continued to fulfill some royal commitments together, for the good of the royal family and their sons, William and Harry. But it was clear to everyone that the relationship between the two was over. Diana, always sincere and transparent, showed in her eyes the mixture of relief and sadness she felt at this time. The following years were challenging for Diana. She had to deal with the weight of seeing her marriage, which was once considered a fairy tale, exposed in the tabloids and criticized by the public. There was gossip, accusations, and many stories, but Diana maintained her dignity. Even when her personal life became the target of sensationalist headlines, she chose to remain silent or speak honestly at strategic moments. In 1995, Diana gave a revealing interview to the BBC, where she spoke openly about the challenges she faced during the marriage and the separation. It was there that she uttered the famous phrase, "There were 3 people in this marriage, so it got a bit crowded." This moment touched the hearts of millions, showing Diana's vulnerability and strength. Finally, in 1996, the divorce was officially finalized. Diana lost her title of Her Royal Highness, but that didn't matter to the public. She remained the people's princess. With the separation formalized, Diana gained more freedom to be who she really was. She no longer had to follow all the royal rules and could focus entirely on what made her happiest: helping people. After the divorce, Diana stepped up her humanitarian activities. She traveled to many countries supporting causes that were ignored by many. She visited hospitals, helped refugees, and continued her fight against landmines, drawing the world's attention to the problems affecting the most vulnerable. Diana increasingly distanced herself from the fairy tale princess image and became a symbol of humanity, compassion, and strength. Even though she lived outside the royal family, Diana never lost her connection with the public. People loved her even more because they saw someone real in her. A woman who faced hardships, got back on her feet, and chose to do good despite everything. So, do you believe that endings can be new beginnings? That's exactly what Diana showed the world. Her story, even after the separation, continued to inspire millions of people. Stay tuned, because Diana's life still holds exciting moments that you can't miss. Have you ever heard the idea that after a storm there always comes calm? For Diana, after years of turmoil in her personal life, it seemed like she was finally finding some happiness again. It was at this time in 1997 that a new chapter began in her life: her romance with Dodi Al-Fayed. Dodi Al-Fayed was an Egyptian businessman, son of billionaire Mohammed Al-Fayed, owner of the famous Harrods department store in London. He had a glamorous life, surrounded by parties and luxury. When Diana met him, the two slowly began to grow closer. Their connection grew, and little by little, Dodi began to occupy a special place in her life. The romance began discreetly, but soon became the favorite subject of the tabloids. During the summer of 1997, Diana and Dodi spent time together in the south of France, traveling on the Al-Fayed family yacht. Images of the two, smiling and relaxing in the sun, dominated the covers of newspapers and magazines around the world. For the public, it was fascinating to see Diana, the people's princess, looking happy and relaxed, far from royal formalities. But the couple's happiness also came at a price. The press followed them wherever they went, making every private moment almost impossible. Paparazzi armed with long-range cameras tried to capture every detail. The smiles, the affectionate gestures, the glances between the two. It was as if Diana and Dodi were living under a constant spotlight. Despite all this attention, Diana seemed to find something special in Dodi. He offered her a refuge, a space where she could just be Diana, away from the pressures of royalty and the media. The two shared light and fun moments, but also talked about dreams and plans for the future. Many speculated that the romance could turn into something even more serious. However, the intensity of the media interest began to take its toll. Diana was already used to being hounded by the tabloids, but now, with Dodi at her side, the situation seemed to have intensified even more. Their every move was followed by a cloud of photographers and journalists, eager to capture the next headline. This romance, although brief, was one of the most talked-about periods of Diana's life. It showed the world a woman who, despite everything, still believed in love and happiness. Diana seemed to be trying to build a new life, free from the constraints of the past. But as you know, not all stories have a happy ending. Diana and Dodi's romance was cut tragically short, leaving the world in shock and full of questions. Want to know what happened on the couple's last trip? Stay tuned, because the next chapter in Diana's story is both emotional and unforgettable. Have you ever wondered how the entire world could stop in a single moment? That's exactly what happened in the early hours of August 31, 1997, when devastating news spread across the planet. Diana, the people's princess, had died in a tragic car accident in Paris. The shock was so profound that it seemed as if the world had lost not just a princess but a friend. That night, Diana was in Paris with Dodi Al-Fayed. After spending the day together, they decided to have dinner at the luxurious Ritz Hotel, which belonged to Dodi's family. The evening should have been peaceful, but the constant presence of paparazzi made their every move a challenge. The photographers followed them relentlessly, eager to capture the next image that would become headline news. Around midnight, Diana and Dodi decided to leave the hotel and head to Dodi's apartment, trying to lose the paparazzi. They got into a black Mercedes-Benz with driver Henri Paul at the wheel and bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones at their side. As the car left the hotel, the chase began. Motorcyclists and cars with photographers sped after them, trying to follow every turn. The car entered the Pont de l'Alma tunnel at a very high speed. Minutes later, the unthinkable happened. The vehicle lost control and crashed violently into the central pillar of the tunnel. The impact was devastating. Dodi and driver Henri Paul died instantly. Trevor Rees-Jones, the only survivor, was seriously injured. Diana, although still alive at the time of the rescue, suffered fatal injuries and was rushed to hospital. Despite the efforts of doctors, Diana did not survive. At 4 a.m., her death was officially announced. The world stopped. It was hard to believe that someone so full of life, so loved and so iconic could have passed away so suddenly. The news caused unprecedented global commotion. Millions of people mourned Diana as if they had lost someone close to them. The streets of London and Paris were filled with flowers, letters and candles, left by those who wanted to pay tribute to the princess who touched so many lives. Outside Kensington Palace, Diana's home, tributes piled up in giant piles, symbolizing the love and longing the world felt. Diana's funeral, held on September 6, 1997, was an unforgettable event. Millions of people watched the ceremony live, as world leaders, celebrities and members of the royal family gathered to say goodbye. But the most memorable moment was when her sons, Princes William and Harry, walked behind her coffin, displaying courage and dignity that moved the world. Diana left a legacy that goes far beyond her short life. She showed that a princess can be more than a symbol. she can be a force for change, an advocate for the vulnerable, and an inspiration to millions. To this day, her memory lives on in the hearts of all those she touched with her grace, empathy, and humanity. If you were moved by Diana's story and want to continue discovering fascinating details about figures who changed the world, be sure to subscribe to the channel, like and share this video. After all, stories like this remind us of the power of love, compassion, and humanity. Until the next video.